Hi everybody, this is Maria from the Counseling Center again, and today we're going to talk about some different strategies to help reduce your vulnerability to stress. During our last episode, we talked a lot about what it is that causes the stress response, how our body responds, and some of the suggestions that we're going to talk about today have to do with sort of those very specific biological responses and ways to sort of reduce the impact that stress has on our body. All right, so we're going to go through a list and hopefully you find a few strategies that are helpful for you, especially during this time of increased stress while we're all in quarantine together. All right, so I have my little notes here that I'm going to refer to as we talk. But there's just like so many strategies that I feel like can be so helpful at reducing the impact of stressors when they come along. The unfortunate thing is that we cannot avoid stress altogether. It does happen. Like stress comes on a daily basis, and no matter how hard we try, sometimes it's just impossible to avoid. So we need to have our armor ready to rock and roll. So when it does hit, we are more resilient and have less of an impact when the stress comes upon us. All right, so some of the beginning things I'd like to talk about are some basic elements of sort of like self-care. What can we do for ourselves to help decrease that biological response when our body starts releasing those hormones? Right, so one of the main things that we can do that is super, super helpful is to eat a balanced diet. And I know that sounds super cliche, but I think people are thinking about it a little bit more now than they did before, even because of the coronavirus and this whole idea of increasing our immunity. There are a lot of components to eating a balanced diet that help protect us from an emotional response. A lot of it has to do with like the vitamin and nutrient content. Certain vitamins help make us incredibly resilient to stress, including the B vitamins, vitamin D, vitamin C helps increase our immune system, right? And magnesium actually helps to keep everything relaxed and helps reduce our anxiety. So if we get a variety of fruits and vegetables, that helps increase our chances of getting all of those nutrients that we need to stay resilient to stress. Another thing that's really important, I think, about nutrients that isn't talked about quite as much is the whole idea of balancing our blood sugar. So in order for us to do that, we have to eat, when I say balance, that means including components of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, which helps keep our blood sugar at a very even state throughout the day. Whenever our blood sugar fluctuates and increases really, really quickly and gets really high or drops really, really suddenly, that is going to have a huge impact on our mood and make us very vulnerable to stressors. And also, on a side note, impact our immune system as well. So it's important to be planful, and it's important to take our nutrition seriously because it has such a huge impact on how we respond to stress around us, right? So making sure that we eat those fruits and vegetables, really good quality proteins and fats, and eating on a regular basis to keep our blood sugar even. The next thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is the impact of drugs and alcohol. Once again, I know, kind of cliche, but there are actual very specific impacts that they have on our stress response system and can actually, in the short term, feel like they're making things better, but in the long term, making things worse. Two examples of those are the use of alcohol and caffeine. Alcohol, I know that I just was reading a few different articles about how alcohol has increased so significantly since we all are under quarantine, and people are really turning to that as a source of comfort. Unfortunately, alcohol is a depressant, and initially it feels really, really helpful at helping us manage our mood, but a lot of times there is a significant increase in vulnerability the following day. And it puts our body at risk, not only of its immune function, but also with mood. And it tends to actually decrease the level of serotonin being produced, which can make us feel sad or depressed, right? And so that makes us even more vulnerable to the quarantine that we're experiencing and all the stress that we're hearing on the media on a daily basis. So that's really important to consider. The other thing is caffeine, and I know that most people, it's hard to avoid feeling at least a little bit anxious whenever we're walking around and going to the grocery store and people are in masks, people are avoiding each other. And caffeine actually has a huge impact on our vulnerability to anxiety in particular. It is acting on the fight or flight hormone that is responsible for causing a lot of our anxious symptoms. And if we go to, and people have different areas of vulnerability here and different levels of tolerance, but if you are drinking too much caffeine, that can actually increase our anxiety levels far above what they need to be during this state of stress. So something to be mindful is our caffeine and our alcohol intake and how that impacts how we're responding to daily stressors. The next thing, which is a big thing that I know a lot of people, especially in college, tend to sort of not take so seriously, is this idea of sleep. So more and more studies are coming out talking about how important sleep is, and especially how much it impacts our ability to manage stress. So a lot of it has to do with us being able to get through full sleep cycles in order for basically our brain to get washed and for us to restore ourselves emotionally. And our world is full of so many things that get in the way of us being able to sleep in a restorative manner that make us ready and raring for the next day. So I want you to consider a few things when it comes to adding routines to your sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene is so important. And what I just said, that word routine, is a big piece of it, right? So one strategy that people don't think about, especially because we're sort of like all off our game right now, we're all over the place when it comes to our schedule. We had this great routine set up and then it kind of went by the wayside because we're all working from home, we're all doing distance learning, which doesn't require us to necessarily get up and do the things that we were doing before. So it's really important for us to sort of maintain a regular sleep schedule, meaning as much as possible being able to go to bed at the same time and to get up the same time. Yes, even on weekends. I know that sounds really hard, but as much as we can do that to try to get our body in the routine and get it ready to start to slow down and get ready for rest. It's really hard for our body to just sort of like stop. And when we're doing homework and when we're working or we're watching the news and we're feeling really stressed out, and then we put down our phone and we lay our head down on the pillow, our body doesn't do a very good of job of just shutting down. It's kind of almost like you're sitting in one of those, my gosh, what were those called? Those like bicycles that you sort of sit on, right? You're like, and you would pedal, and you'd stop pedaling and the wheel would keep running, right? That's what happens with our brain and that's what happens with our body. It needs some time to kind of like slow down that wheel before coming to a stop. So even if we do go to sleep right away, our body doesn't necessarily enter the sleep cycles in the way that it should unless we have a sort of a relaxation and a calm down ritual. So getting up at the same time and going to bed at the same time is really important. Also, stopping stressful activities and things that call our body stress, including exposure to a lot of blue light and a lot of watching our phones and watching stressful things, should all end about 2 hours before going to sleep. That also sounds really hard. I recognize that. Some helpful things can be some blue light blocking screens on our phones. That can be really helpful. What it does is the blue light actually impacts our ability to produce melatonin, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, which helps us fall asleep and get a good restful night's sleep. So you're going to want to block that blue light, and if at all possible, try to limit technology about 2 hours before going to bed. You also want to create some very specific cues to your body to let it know now it's time to stop doing stressful things and start to do relaxing things. So incorporating some rituals like reading books or taking baths or showers or having a hot cup of tea, things that sort of activate your senses, that remind the body how to relax, doing some stretching, maybe some of the mindfulness strategies that we talked about at the last episode can be really, really helpful at signaling to your body it's time to go to sleep. And then once you do actually fall asleep, your body will be able to enter those sleep cycles in a more predictable manner to get that restorative sleep to make you more resilient to the next day's stress. So sleep's a really big deal. If you have any other questions about sleep, I have a million strategies. I could talk about sleep all day long, so feel free to email me over at the Counseling Center. The next thing I'd like to talk about is exercise. That's another thing I feel like that's shifted so much recently. All the gyms have sort of closed. A lot of times people would work out when it came to doing like sporty and athletic events, and a lot of that has stopped because of the social distancing rules. So that is an incredibly protective element to add to our daily routine. It really helps us sort of process and metabolize all of the stress hormones that are produced on a daily basis. And it also helps keep our blood sugar stable. I mean, it just does so many powerful, wonderful things. And now is the time to sort of recreate that routine, because what we were doing before might not necessarily work. So getting your body up and moving and creating a very specific time for that to happen, there's some really great strategies out there now. There's a lot of online classes you can take. Walking is so incredibly helpful. I know that everyone has encouraged people to get out and about. But it is something that is so completely vital for managing stress, to keep us moving on a daily basis. Our bodies were created to move, and when we stop, that in and of itself can create stress. So it's important to remember to try to incorporate movement whenever possible. Another thing to consider is doing something that helps you feel like you've accomplished something. So we as human beings require this element of, I like to call mastery. Like, we need to feel like we have mastered something, accomplished something, checked something off of our list by the end of the day, in order for us to feel fulfilled and to help to manage stress the next day, right? So sometimes I think it feels like, especially if you're not getting up or getting dressed or staying in the house all day, it's hard to really get that element of mastery. So you want to be intentional. You want to come up with strategies around, like, what can I do on a daily basis, and come up with some really interesting ways. Maybe learn a new dance, maybe call somebody that you hadn't called in a really long time, reconnect with somebody, go through, read a book that you, on a subject matter that you wouldn't have time, but where you learn something. Really sort of set goals for yourself when it comes to completing homework on your distance learning, but finding a way to feel like, wow, I really accomplished something and gained a sense of mastery. And then allowing yourself to relax after that. So sort of setting yourself a time frame where you're able to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish, and then afterwards giving yourself permission to relax. It's helpful to sort of like have those very specific sets of time throughout the day, so that it doesn't feel like you're experiencing like challenge or stress or relaxation the whole day, and you're able to sort of compartmentalize and create rituals around that element of mastery, right? Another thing to consider is the exposure to nature. So, oh my goodness, the studies that are coming out now around how helpful nature is to protecting the immune system, but it's so helpful also at help managing to protect stress. So finding different places to go for walks, finding different ways to practice slowing down. We have an opportunity of time to now actually notice things while we're going for our walks. And there's a lot of amazing metro parks out there. I was actually up at Glendon Woods the other day, close to Otterbein's campus, where you can explore, and being around trees and being around specific elements of nature. I think they recommended at least 2 hours a week. If you're really looking for like extra credit superstars, we're looking at 5 hours a week in nature. Which is the most beneficial at being able to protect your body against stress. But that being in nature increases resilience, probably more than any of these other elements that we've actually talked about up to this point. What I mentioned before is this idea of developing routines. Our bodies are very cyclical, and really there's so many things about how we work biologically and emotionally that have to do with rhythm and have to do with very specific cycles. So creating a predictable routine helps to build resilience against stress. There's so many things that are unpredictable now. We don't know when quarantine's going to be over. We don't know what's happening with this virus. We don't know if we're going to be back in session in the summer, or if we're going to be even back in session next fall. A lot of things are so up in the air. So creating things that are predictable, that you can control, like your own personal routine, is very, very helpful at helping managing stress. Another piece that I'd like to mention is one of the end points that I'd like to make is this idea of connecting to others. So I'm going to actually have another special sort of like workshop episode specifically about connecting to others and about loneliness and what we're experiencing now. But I'd like to introduce this idea of how protective it is to have relationships with others and be connecting with them on a daily basis. Even if we can't do it face to face, it's important to be intentional about connecting with our loved ones and with our friends, even when we're not around them. Some really helpful strategies that I found have worked are to actually schedule phone calls, schedule phone calls often, a couple days a week, a couple nights a week, where you're connecting with people that you feel like really you can listen to you and you can share the stress load with. And if sometimes it's really hard, even though we're less busy, sometimes it's almost harder because we have other strange responsibilities with being home alone. But to really be intentional about setting aside time and making appointments to connect with others, either via phone or Skype or FaceTime, so that you're able to share that element of stress with your loved ones. So hopefully you'll check into our next episode, which is going to be talking so much about loneliness and talking about why it is so important that we connect with others. And I'll give you more details during that. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation about how to protect ourselves from stress and learning about some different preventative strategies that can help us in today's world. Thank you.